Hello and welcome to Stories and Lessons. This is your host, Tim Winnicky. Today's episode is sponsored by Empowered Change, Counseling and Education. If you're looking for help in the Denver area, please give me a call. I'd be more than happy to either work with you directly or make sure that you find the right therapist for you. My focus is always getting somebody to the best fit possible. I am doing well enough that I'm not so worried about scrambling to get every client in my door, which can be a relief for the clients. That way we know that if you're starting with me, it's because we're going to be a good fit, or I'm going to help you find someone who is. So with that said, welcome to 2019. I'm sorry I didn't get an episode out earlier this month. It's been a little hectic, but I am very excited for today's episode. Today we've got Duane France. Duane and I have known each other for almost 3 years now. And you'll hear me talk a little bit about who he is to me and how much of an inspiration he's been for me in my practice and the education that I provide. But more than that, Duane is a retired combat veteran from the Army who's now a mental health counselor. You want to talk about a guy in the helping profession with a story? It's going to be Duane. We didn't get to the mess of any of his combat or anything like that. I feel like this story that he had was a bit more relatable across the board. He talks about how he goes from being a first sergeant, which is essentially one of the senior enlisted leaders in a unit, the one who's generally in charge of discipline and making sure everybody has what they need, to rolling through and becoming one of the most respected mental health counselors in Colorado when it comes to veterans issues. I'm really happy to share the field with him, and I'm really excited we got him on today. So, enjoy. Hey, Duane, thanks for coming on today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I was really looking forward to this, man. It felt like a real coming of circle for me in the podcast, since yours was the first one I ever did. So I've been kind of waiting for this like full circle moment, and I'm really excited to have you on, man. Thanks for being here.
No, you're right. I mean, it's it's sort of the same thing happened to me as some random person had me on their podcast, and now look where that goes.
Well, what are you on now? Like episode 98?
Yeah, we're on episode 98. I've got the 100th show in a can. It's going to be a pretty good one.
Nice, man.
Things are starting to pick up. The fun thing is yesterday was sort of a red letter day. I got an email from Sebastian Younger.
What?
I've been trying to aim for some pretty high level, and so I had some people trying to reach out to him, and then I just got an email randomly from him yesterday saying, "Hey, what do you want? Maybe I got like 40 minutes next week, and we'll talk." And
oh my God, that'd be amazing. So for the listeners, if you don't know, Sebastian Younger wrote a book called Tribe on Homecoming and Belonging. It tends to be a book that I sign almost every single one of my clients. And it's all about how we build community and why those of us who have been in extreme situations find parts of that we miss. He's a great speaker. He's got TED Talks, or not TED Talks, but he's got a lot of interviews out there too.
Yeah, no, there's TED Talks, and there's a lot of, and a lot of it does have to do with transition stress. And obviously he is open, free, and willing to come on some random guy in Colorado's podcast, but he's, and he is very responsive to veterans and stuff like that. So yeah, it's starting to pick up and get some interesting guests.
Well, just to push a little bit on that, man, I think when you started, you were a random guy with a podcast. I've been tracking who you've been getting on. I don't think that's an accurate statement anymore. So I think if you were just some rando guy, you wouldn't be getting the guest you have. I know for me, I wouldn't be so excited for having you if you weren't the guy you are in Colorado and if you weren't making the difference with veteranmentalhealth.com. So with that, right? So Duane has a podcast, highly recommended for anybody looking at veterans issues. I'm sure I'll talk about that in the intro, but there's a bunch of other stuff that you've got going on. Do you want to tell the folks about that?
Yeah, it's I'm a big guy, both in real life and online. And, I've got so many hats. That's why I don't have much hair, is because the hats keep flying on and off. So primarily I work as a clinical mental health counselor at an outpatient clinic here in the Springs. We focus mainly on military veterans families. So that's the Family Care Center. So I manage their veterans programs, which encompass our Veterans Choice stuff. We are the primary non-VA providers for our Veterans Court down here, so we do a lot with justice-involved veterans. And then also in with that, we develop a nonprofit where we can provide counseling to veterans who and their spouses who may have barriers to care, bad paper, honestly make too much money for the VA, whatever some of these barriers are. That's sort of on the clinical side. Along with that, I'm really focused on a lot of community advocacy. As well as I do, is that the awareness about mental health in general isn't there, but veteran mental health, especially in our communities, isn't there, which is really how the blog and the podcast got started, was to try to get that information out there. So do a lot of community stuff. I'm on some advisory boards, Objective Zero, which is a suicide prevention app, locally here, the Peak Military Care Network. So people are really starting to want to incorporate mental health in the transition, because we're trying to do a lot of other things, and obviously, they may not be working. Over the past several years, I've done some legislative stuff, tried to get some things in the we did get some court-specific bills passed in Colorado based on trying to get more support for mental health in veterans courts. Also, I'm on the Public Policy and Legislation Committee for the American Counseling Association, so really trying to address how do we address these things legislatively? As well as I do, the Medicare for LPCs. How do we get LPCs in the VA and the DOD? So there's that. I got an 18-year-old that's about to go into college, and
oh man, it's brutal.
Now, so I've got they're self-sufficient now, right? They feed themselves and clothe themselves. So they're okay. It's not like I have toddlers running around.
Yeah, but empty nest is never a hard thing for clients. That's not what half my client load is, or fathers with their kids leaving.
Well, and that's the my daughter's going to school here in Colorado, and I tried to keep my daughter as close as we can, but she's going up to school in Greeley. I wanted her to go to school, of course, here in the Springs. The boy, I'm saying, hey, how about Grand Junction or something? I'm like, no. He was like, why would I do that? I live here. He was like, why am I ever going to leave? This is my house, So, yeah, it's weird, but it's so, that kind of piece. But a lot of the work that I'm doing is revolving around trying to raise awareness about veteran mental health and change the way that people think and talk about it.
Yeah. I think one of my favorite things was I feel like I got very lucky in when we connected. I was just finishing out the program. I think you were like a year ahead of me on licensing and graduating.
Yep.
And I showed up at the Colorado Counseling Association meeting, and you got that yearly award for recognition.
Yes. That was for advocacy. That was for the work in legislative advocacy. That's one of the things that a lot of professional counselors don't sort of do. We hunker down in our office and close the door and do our thing. But that specific was regarding the advocacy work that I try to do.
Well, and I don't know whether you ever recognize this or not, but so part of what the impact on seeing you get the award, connecting with you there to connect later and develop the relationship we've developed, you had your training that you built out for clinicians on military issues around mental health. Mm-hmm. And that's when talking to you about that gave me the idea to move the education that I did on campus for staff and professors through the mental health lens, get it in my internship site, and push forward with that. So I mostly wanted to take the opportunity to say thank you, right? And now the way that goes for me is I probably do the hour, just lunch and learn on veteran mental health about once a quarter. But the deal that I tell everybody is if it's north of Castle Rock, I'll do it. And if it's south of Castle Rock, I tell them to call you.
Right. And that's, I definitely appreciate hearing that. Often we don't really know about the impact. And as a matter of fact, this is part of the story that we'll get into a little bit, but often we don't realize the impact that we have on other people. Where serendipity definitely plays a part. And it's encouraging to hear that that's where it was. And I've always used you as an example, especially to other clinicians, that the way I always say it is the work that I do with justice-involved veterans, you do with college students and men and things like that, right? And we can very much focus on certain areas as opposed to just trying to do everything for everybody.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's the trick with it, right? And that's generally, I don't know about how the themes have gone when you do your training for other clinicians. It's, we don't always need a specialist, right? We don't always need this resource that's exactly perfect for us. And I think that's what I'm trying to get out with this podcast in a broader spectrum for just guys. We don't always need a clinician that's specialized in exactly my terminal unicorn uniqueness. Mm-hmm. We just need somebody who understands enough to be competent and push that the way it goes. So I think if I could talk to you for hours, and I think we have, on all the different ways we do the work. I'm going to be a little selfish and bring it back into the story, man. So when I saw you get the award, I was like, oh, who's this guy? He must have been around for a while to get this. And you had just graduated, and the ACA, the American Counseling Association, was bringing you out to the national conference to present on veteran mental health before you ever got licensed, before you were kind of accredited in the field. And I was a little dumbfounded. I was like, how the hell? Like, I get he's got a 20-year military career, he's got some background, but these people respect the credential, and they're bringing out somebody without it who's trying to get it to educate them. So I want that story. I want to know how the hell that happened.
So let me correct. It's not like I hit main stage as a keynote speaker at the American Counseling Association conference. It was actually a subdivision of the ACA, the Military and Government Counseling Association. So basically, if we were at a music festival, I was on one of the side stages. It was not the big one. You make it sound a lot more prestigious, maybe, than it actually was.
For me, it's a national conference, right? Getting on the side stage at a national conference is like keynoting here,
right?
That's I don't want to dismantle that. If we had a keynote on military mental health at a national conference, I think you and I would be over the moon. But I don't expect that anytime soon.
Well, but even, and these are, for those maybe who may not be clinicians who are listening, but this is just we always think that things are out of our reach until we actually try to reach them. And so that's my thing is, who says that a guy who's, provisionally licensed can't, get up and speak. We tell ourselves that, so we take ourselves off the table. But the neat thing about that is really so that the last 2 years I presented at the pre-conference, and this year is the first year that we're actually going to be, me and another colleague are actually presenting at the main conference.
Nice.
And there is a lot more interest on veteran mental health from the Professional Counselors Association. Yeah,
I'm noticing it pick up here too. I think as people recognize that there is a need and they don't need to be intimidated by us, that it's just people needing help like anybody else they're working with. It's gone a long way.
Right.
So how did you get there, man? You finished up, you started grad school. Like, first, should we go back to that? Like, how do you go from being a first sergeant to grad school with a bunch of 25-year-olds?
Well, this is back in my day, we started, and really it started in 2007. I was in Iraq. It was my first, it was my only Iraq deployment. One of my E5s came in. I was in E7, and he came in with his associate's degree. He was all proud he had just gotten in the mail.
Nice.
He said, hey, what's your degree in, Sergeant? And I said, my degree's in shut the hell up. Right? It's none of your business. I was like,
it sounds like the Army.
And the idea of why I didn't have a degree. And so, and he was like, so I started thinking about it. And the first thing was, at that point, I did not know that I was going to be a mental health counselor. I thought that most likely my after the military goal would have been to be like a history teacher or an English teacher, one of those cool teachers that you could just derail the class by asking about their war stories and you wouldn't get any homework. That's pretty much where I saw myself.
Yeah.
ROTC instructor, something like that, right? I always thought it was going to be something in education because teaching is really what I always enjoyed, even as a leader in the military. And so at that point, it was I was just looking for a degree with the least amount of math possible. And so there was a counseling and applied psychology associate's degree. And I said, sure, why not? I'm interested. So I was already sort of tuned into maybe this. It was maybe starting to be a glimmer on the front end. But then we get back from Iraq, and at this point, we were still doing a lot of the large scale reintegration conferences. And one of the breakout rooms for our company happened to be a counselor who is down here at the vet center. And she went through her spiel, don't punch the dog, don't yell at the, drivers and things like that, and really focusing on that. But then randomly, she said, oh, and by the way, if any of you are interested in psychology, take a look at the mental health field, because there are not enough clinical mental health counselors in the industry, or not enough combat veterans who are in the mental health field. Mm-hmm. And for me, it was sort of like a stone just, dropped into the lake. And I was like, wow, that's actually kind of true. And I'm kind of digging this thing. And it was just that random. There were probably 100 people in the room. And to my knowledge, none of the rest of them became mental health counselors, but it was the right thing said at the right time. And this is where serendipity, we all know that serendipity plays a role in anybody's career development. But I could have been in the next room over and the person didn't see it, or she could have not, said that, right? Mm-hmm. And it just so happened. And there was that. And then about the same time, the Veterans Court here in Colorado Springs showed up. And of course, it's in my mind, I'm going to be a professional counselor, or it's something to look into. And then I saw this article in the paper and I'm like, man, those guys are going to need somebody who understands what they went through. Mm-hmm. So at that sort of that juncture, I was like, okay, that might be something I'm interested in. I still had, that was 2008 by that time. And so I didn't retire in 2014. So I still had another, a bunch of years, 2 more Afghanistan deployments. And so I started on the path. I finished my associates. I did my bachelor's. All of them were either online or hybrid. I don't ever recommend doing a 500 or a 400 level neuropsychology course in Afghanistan. It wasn't necessarily fun.
Poor choice.
But I got through it. We'd be on a 3-day patrol, and then I'd come back and I'd try to knock out like 7 pages of a 14-page paper, and then I'd go back out. And some guys played Call of Duty. I
did homework.
Right? So after that, I started working. After that second deployment, or that first Afghanistan deployment, which was second overall, I was a company first sergeant, and still, kind of continuing on. And then I started my master's program while I was still on active duty. And there are some of the KCREP accredited programs are hybrid programs. One of them here in Colorado, Adams State University, where you can do classes online, mm-hmm. And then you can go do experiential classes down in Alamosa. We'd have to go down to Alamosa twice a year. And then we had to find our own internship and practicum sites, which is sort of where what I did. And it turns out that probably the second site that I called happened to be the place that was doing therapy for the Veterans Court at the time. And they were looking for, the minute that, it's like, oh, you're a combat veteran and you're looking for your internship. And so sort of that idea of what I saw myself doing back in 2008 is what I started to do when I started my practicum internship in 2014. And a lot of this was just sort of being open to the story, or open to the opportunity, right place, right time kind of stuff. But in the meantime, I applied. So the National Board of Certified Counselors Foundation, our licensure board, they have a program where you can, it's a military scholarship program. And I was just trying to do everything. I actually applied for it in 2014, and I was not selected. So then in 2015, I said, you know what? It was like a week before the deadline. I said, I'll try it again. So I was selected for the 2015. Part of that, one of the biggest pieces of that scholarship year came with a mentor. And my mentor, Danette Patterson, she is the one that put me on the path to say, this is what you need to do. She helped me present at the state conference here. Not helped me, but she helped me prepare to present. And then she was the one that gave me the connections and said, hey, you need to listen to this guy, and told me how I need to do it. And that's how I got connected with the Military and Government Counseling Association, and they invited me out to talk. So that was sort of the 9 years summed up in about 10 minutes.
I like the year a minute story, right? Well, it's funny, man. I think when we did my interview for you, it's funny to me, the parallels, right? So I was in England, and they were just launching the bystander program that the Air Force had, where, rather than just getting up in front of a PowerPoint saying, hey, don't rape people, it's bad. Instead, they were going to do this, how do you notice something's happening? Why is it important to do something in small groups? And I got to go through the training for that. And there were the 3 PhDs training the European theater folks that were going all over Europe to go do these trainings. And one of them pulled me aside and said, what do you do in uniform? And I'm an intelligence. She's like, you're doing the wrong thing. You need to be doing these kinds of things. Like I've been doing this a while. I see you. You need to be doing something else. And like you said, man, and if she hadn't pulled me aside, if she hadn't seen that, who knows? Like, I might still be doing contractor deployments out in Afghanistan for $100,000 a year, right? Making a lot more money.
With a lot less satisfaction, right?
Absolutely true.
By the time that, and there was a bit of a hiatus in which I did branch out into something different for about 18 months while I was finishing up my degree and my retirement. And there was a transition period. I was working as a program director for a homeless veterans program down here in Colorado Springs. It was much more like social work. And I found very quickly that that's not where I wanted to be. That's not where I wanted to do. And again, there's this theme of mentorship, because even after that scholarship year, my mentor, Danette, still to this day, I credit her with any amount of all of the success maybe that I have. But she helped me understand, and we had that conversation, and she was like, what satisfies you? What energizes you? When you leave from one place and you go to your counseling, which is more important? And so I think that idea of mentorship is critical. Of course, we know it's critical in the military, but it's critical in life in general, actually having a mentor. And this is somebody who has no dog in the hunt whatsoever. I consider my clinical director here a mentor, but she's not going to recommend that I go find another job because she wants to keep me here, right? She's not going to explore my current satisfaction. Having a mentor that is totally outside, whose concern is solely you and your career development and your focus, whether you call them business coaches or whatever, but actually having somebody that is outside and has no alternative agenda other than your success. I've seen how critical it has been and how much it has, in a lot of different areas, through where the blog came from. You and I share a mentor in some of that, Tamara Suttle, that really is the one that helped me start with the blog and then the podcast and so on.
She's a bit of a bully about blogging.
Enthusiastic. And she's right about it, right? Because, but it's part of this. It takes what we know to be true inside the clinical space and shares it with people, right? It's, we can't hide the light under the bushel anymore.
Well, and if anybody's into blogging, one of the things I like about Duane's is he's a machine. Like I think I've had conversations with you before about how much content you pump out, and you're just like, I just like writing and I got in the habit of it. And meanwhile, I try to I remember I was like, let me try blogging. I'll do a few for Duane. I'll throw these out there. Each one of those took me 3 days to write. And they were these little half page things. I was like, all right, I can talk. I think I'll do the podcast instead. But I can feel your voice through your writing. I like how genuine it is. I think one of the things I look for in blogs that I read are people that put out enough that it's not so polished it feels sterile, and that it has some stream of conscious, because that's where the meat is for me. And yours always has that, man. I still love reading it, and it means a lot to me and the community that you're still putting it out. It's really good.
No, I appreciate that. Although, because we're all human, what I just heard you say is my blog is not polished. So thank you for that too.
Hey. Well, it's so I think when I say not polished, right? The spelling's on point. Like, you've got your editing down, but you're not trying to always come up with the blog, the 5 things you do when you do
right.
this.
Yeah, it's not manufactured. That's what and that's the thing is it's in it. In I think for me it's what seems right and what feels right. But you talk about whether I'm a machine. It's a fish doesn't know he's wet, right? I mean, it's sort of the thing. To me, it's and this is maybe pulling the curtain back. I'm horrible with deadlines. So like my Thursday blog post is usually written Thursday morning. And I write it in like 2.5 hours. I sort of have the idea. Sometimes if I'm feeling a little bit ambitious, I might start it Wednesday night. But usually from blank page to publishing the blog post, it's usually 2.5 to 3 hours.
Well, what's interesting there is you mentioned because we're human, right? You said that you're horrible about deadlines, and yet consistently it's posted on Thursday morning.
I'm horrible about, this is the idea of procrastination I always make the deadline, but I always wait until just before the deadline. So maybe I'm very good with deadlines. It's when I don't have a deadline is when things
it all goes sideways. I had another guest and we were talking about this because it's one of the things I struggle with too. I don't do a lot of prep work. Like and it sounds like your process is a little similar, where if I don't have an idea in my head, I can't do it by deadline. I need something kind of on the back burner where I'm processing it before I put pen to paper or engage in a project. But I think it was back in like 2010, they did a study where they gave a bunch of people, I think it was like 3,000 people, a task and gave them a year to do it. And then they figured out who turned it in when, right? There were people that literally did it a week after they got it just to knock it out. And then all the range you would expect: on time, late, early. And they didn't really care about when they got it done as much as what their process was for doing it. And what they found was there was no qualitative difference in the quality of work based on somebody who was a procrastinator and somebody who was a prepper. And the trick was the procrastinators that produced good work are like you and me, where we've got to have the idea kicking around. We've got to have the process go, so that way we can sit down in an hour and just pump it out. Mm-hmm. But it's not that we're not engaged in it. And I think you and I I think you've got a few years on me, but I think we're of a generation. Mm-hmm. And when I was in school, the mantra was preparation is success. Where if you don't have something that someone else can see as preparation, you're not doing it right. And now we're finding out that that's just not true, right? There's a lot of internal preparation. It's like the same thing that happens clinically, right? How many of your clients from the first call to the first sessions report active improvement just by making the first appointment?
Right.
Yeah.
And I think in the way I look at it is I've never been great at, it's not like there's natural talent, so to speak. But one thing I have always had was discipline, right? I've never been the fastest, the strongest, most intelligent, but many times it is the most disciplined. And you talk about the consistency. I don't know any other way to be other than I get up, at 4:30 on a Thursday morning and I start writing, right? And this is the discipline that I have instilled in myself. And there is this process. And so there's this idea of someone with natural talent who doesn't have the discipline to develop that isn't going to be very good.
No.
Someone without natural talent but takes the discipline, they'll actually be better than the person with talent that didn't develop it. So I think for me, it really has been, it's just repetition, rinse and repeat. And so that's where, and I hear people, the value, the blog posts or appreciate the podcast or the interviews. For me, it's almost become a natural rhythm. And it's
Well, you're 2 years in now, aren't you? On the podcast and 3 in the blog?
So February of 2016 was when the blog started, and then July of 2017 is when the podcast started.
Man, it's like almost nailed. 3 years for the blog, a year and a half for the podcast. It's great. Well, and so hopefully after a year of doing it, right, you find that rhythm or you change what you're doing.
Sure. And I look back on the when I first started, I mean, I tried everything. I tried, 2 blogs a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. I tried, just different things. And then all the way up until the podcast started, it was 2 blogs a week. It was one on Tuesday and one on Thursday. And I had tried different, again, different combinations of it. And it just really didn't work until I finally settled into this groove. So then when the podcast came along, I just substituted the Tuesday blog for the Tuesday podcast. And so now it's podcast Tuesdays, blog Thursdays. And I still have tried to mess around with that and try to do something else and bring in something new. It just never sticks because it's not Tuesday and Thursday.
Right. Those habits get ingrained. I find the same thing with my clinical days. So the practice over the winter, for whatever reason, got absolutely packed full. Like normally I don't get new clients between like Thanksgiving and New Year's, right? Everybody's off doing family, saving up for Christmas, whatever. And then they come back in January, like, oh my God, I saw my family, help me. And this time, for whatever, it exploded. And I had this idea in my head about what my schedule looks like. And I do my clinical days, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday. And then I leave Wednesday for just paperwork, care coordination. And Friday tends to be my day I go do education, do the podcast, go talk to whoever. And I was looking at the hours for that, and I tried to shift them around, and it's just not working. Like that rhythm is now what I need it to be. And I think that's an important thing to acknowledge too. You don't always have to change just because it's been that way for a while. Sometimes it's just good to stick with what works.
Right. I mean, and we have these containers, we have these containers in our lives, and you and I had the container of the military, and we had to figure out when that container was no longer there, what it meant. And that's one thing that I've found is many of the veterans who I work with that struggle is they don't have that sort of, they didn't establish that boundary in and of themselves, right? And it doesn't mean that, we're so, OCD to have every single minute, planned out, but having this, I mean, it's almost, you hear these stories about Steve Jobs, always wearing the same clothes, right? The same jeans, the same t-shirt. So he didn't have to worry. He didn't have to waste mental energy on what am I going to wear today, right? And so it's this idea of, well, I know that I'm going to do a blog post every Thursday and people expect it, which is another thing is there's the expectation. And so, well, I got to do it because that's what I do. And it's, by this time, again, it's been a habit of a couple years. And it just sort of, your day fits around that. And that gives you enough time, like you said, to develop some of that other stuff that kind of puts things into the future.
Yeah. One less thing to worry about. The one, set the deadline, and then just accept that you're going to do it. Don't worry about whether it's going to get done by the deadline. Just accept that it's going to happen and knock it out. And that leaves the space to come up with the ideas.
Right. And then that's the thing of you put whatever goal that you have, right? I never, and usually the goal starts from somewhere else. So I did not start out with the goal to present at the MGCA or anything like that. That was essentially made for me by my mentor. And I was like, and she knew it's going to be good for you. You're going to enjoy it. And I did. And that's it's the same thing with podcasting. I didn't even realize podcasting was a thing until 2 separate podcasts said, hey, we want you to come on the show. And I was like, well, that's pretty interesting. This is a new way of communicating. And then, hearing, and this is a conversation I've had with my clinical director of why don't more clinicians do this? Well, because that's not what clinicians do.
No.
Right? This isn't what therapists do. And so why would they think of doing something other than what they do? And so by having that much, the space for the creativity, it gives you the opportunity to pursue things and not take no for an answer. I mean, not just take no for an answer. Of course, you're going to get the no's.
But keep asking different people till you find an avenue.
There's this, I don't know if you've seen this, but my essential, if it is the guiding principle, it's the audacity principle. I don't think we've talked about the audacity principle, have we?
No, but it's all over your blog, man. Go ahead and share it. I love it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the audacity principle is this. More often than not, usually in non-scientifically, it's 8 times out of 10, but more often than not, bold and decisive action by me will bring about the result that I want, unless it's limited by someone else's authority, right? So I started noticing this in the military, that I could get away with a lot more if I just said, hey, this is what we're going to do, rather than asking permission. And this isn't, do first and ask for permission later, but it's well, why are we limiting ourselves in this? Mm-hmm. Every once in a while, the commander would come down and say, yeah, no, that's not happening. That's the authority piece.
But make them tell you no.
Right. But a lot of people will not even try something because they think somebody is not going to let them do it. Mm-hmm. Rather than, I'm going to put it out, I'm going to step forward, I'm going to do this. And who's going to tell me no? And that's where the book came from. Who am I to write a book? Well, apparently so I just put a bunch of stuff together and I put the book together. And so this is the thing is a lot of people will limit themselves because they're not moving out in boldness and audacity.
Mm-hmm. Well, so I think that's been, I remember the first conversation we had about it was when I asked you about the book. I'm like, man, this is great. Like, what are you doing with it? And you're like, yeah, man, I'm doing it. I'm just doing it. And I thought about all the different programming and things I did after the military and some of the stuff that happened when I was in, and that lines up. And what's interesting is I don't see, when I'm working with my kind of E6s and below, there's less of the audacity concept. Mm-hmm. But the minute that I'm working with my senior NCOs and my officers, when they think back to their effective moments, that audacity is there. Mm-hmm. And that becomes the expectation. So with that, I guess my follow-up question is, you made it all the way in your career where you were a man of authority, mm-hmm. where you were in and of a system, but you also had decision-making authority in the military, which is not an easy place to get to, right? And then you go be an intern. And if you want to talk about being in a place where someone has literally no authority, I can't think of a less empowered person than an intern. You're here to learn. You're here to do what you're told. You're here to learn the concepts. How was that transition for you? Because it sounds like it happened right after you took off your sergeant stripes.
I mean, it was kind of simultaneous. I was actually, so I had already submitted for retirement. So this was sort of during my retirement year. I still had some, some minor administrative stuff. But yeah, I wasn't leading or doing anything at the time. And again, it's what I don't know. I had, again, some very excellent mentors. One of them, which is our clinical director now, another one of them who is on the board of directors for the nonprofit, that I don't know. They didn't treat me like an intern. They basically said, hey, I mean, of course I sat in and I learned and they said, this is how you do the assessments and stuff like that. But like, we got the first clients and I'm like, I'm not ready for this. And my supervisor was like, well, you are. So because she was like, because I say you are, then you are. And she was like, these particular clients, you couldn't hurt and you could possibly help. So it was just thrown in deep into the pool. Yeah. And so I was running pretty quick. And again, just the idea of, where can I pitch in? What can I do? How can I, this is again, a military idiom of, you're always improving your foxhole. Yeah. How can I help this organization do things better, in this way? And so again, I just see it really as just a natural extension of what I've always done.
Did you ever have a moment where you were at your site? The internship experience for a clinician is designed around, this is really your first attempt to try all these things you've been learning now for 3 years. And we don't want you doing much else because you need to focus in so these stick. And you come from a background of improving that foxhole, seeing needs, and you likely had a perspective as a fellow combat veteran that a lot of the people you were working with didn't. Did you ever have this moment where you were working on something and missed things before a supervisor said, "Hey, you need to slow that down and pay attention here to improve your clinical skill. I know you've got these big pictures. I know you're seeing these problems. You're not wrong, but that's not the role you're in right now." Did that ever happen for you?
I don't think in that way because, and again, I still have a great relationship with my direct supervisor. She's, like I said, she's our clinical director now. I think that I anticipated those moments and we avoided them, right?
Okay.
So we steered around the potholes rather than going through the potholes and sort of doing that. I mean, yes, there were times of we call them doorknob confessions. You know exactly. You know, we go through the entire session and we do good work, and then right before it's like, oh, by the way, there was this other thing that happened, and so that literally in with this particular client that I'm thinking of, it was actually critical to a breakthrough that we then had. But he held it the whole time. So it was the idea of, holy crap, what do I do? But I think we always talked about that, and we always kind of worked through that before those mistakes were made, rather than, maybe there's, and I definitely don't want to, make it sound like it's all, peaches and gravy from the beginning. Not that peaches and gravy actually taste good together, but
the things we eat when we're young.
Yeah. But so I think there was a level of awareness that I had, and a student mindset. There's this idea of always go into something as a white belt. And so I knew that I always had that student learning mindset, and I couldn't be an effective teacher unless I learned. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I don't know of anything specifically where it was, hey, slow down, you missed this thing.
Well, so go back to that knowing that you're a white belt. I like that concept. How have you managed to maintain that through your career? Because that's a theme for a lot. That was a theme for me. And I know it's a theme for a lot of my vets, where they leave the military, they are an expert, and they have to transition to being the white belt again. And it's an uncomfortable place to be for a lot of them. It's a status loss. It's discomforting, and it takes them time to process. And it sounds like you did your work before you ever got there. You made sure that you had mentors that were aware of that being a possibility and help you maintain that focus. What else did you do to kind of find that lesson?
Again, I think it has to do with knowing what is common in each of those and relying on the commonalities, and then understanding what the difference is. As we're talking, this isn't something that I've fully fleshed out, but it's this idea of, we have the framework, but it could be a totally different house. And so knowing that I'm going into a situation that there's that there's going to be something different. This is actually one thing that I don't know where it comes from, and I don't know why it is, but I've always had the ability to see two seemingly different situations and understanding the commonality between them and bring them together. So more of a synergistic kind of thing. And I can see that in individuals. I can see that between, one of the things I love about the podcast, I have a podcast with Emily Carley of Witness to War Foundation. And I have a podcast with Sarah Verardo of the Independence Fund. They don't know each other, but I can see where their commonalities would exist. And so having the sort of that, I know what the structure is, I know what leadership is, and then also knowing that I don't know something, it keeps my eyes fresh, I guess, when I go into new situations.
That's great. And the reason why that was so poignant for me is my big struggle at my internship site was not literally, I had supervisor that had to say, hey, slow down on building out the vet programming. You need to learn how to counsel. Like, you're here to learn these things and you're doing that, but give it more attention. Like, take these lessons in, and then that's going to come. Just slow it down. And I think in part it's because I was used to being told no and finding a way around it. Mm-hmm. And even in the military, right, there's almost always a path to somebody who can hear you. Mm-hmm. And this was one of the first times where it's like, no, the buck stops here. This is like, I'm the director here. and I'm telling you how this is going to go. And that was uncomfortable space for me.
And that's something else that comes along with the audacity principle is your bold and decisive action was met very clearly with someone else's authority. And so it's being able to take that no, it's being able to accept that, okay, I got a no here, but I got 8 other yeses. And so I'm okay in the balance of things, but understanding that, thwarted ambition, I guess, is being comfortable with the yeses that you have versus the nos that you don't.
Well, and some of it was about developing out the trust with the organization. Like we built the veterans program. It just didn't happen as fast as I wanted it to at the time. And it worked out, and that ended up being the basis for the trainings I do now. It ended up being a cornerstone of what I built into my practice later. And so part of it, I think, for me has been doing your research on what authority you're going to work under. So that way you can trust that authority to have that authority effectively and entrust that you're both working towards the same goal. And that was kind of the lesson for me. It took me a good 2 weeks to get comfortable with that no, right? To actually sit back and go, wait, what am I not learning that I'm supposed to be taking in right now? And it would have been nice to have that lesson before that, because that's 2 weeks of learning I could have been doing, right? And it's not the end of the world, but that's one of those moments.
And this is the other thing that I look at in perspective, right? I say to myself, why isn't this happening quicker? Why isn't it happening, faster, or what have you? In this impatience of, I want more and I want more and I want more. But in the scheme of things, those 2 weeks, especially just now, they were 4 years ago. It was a blip on the radar, right? And you just happened to remember that it was 2 weeks. But 2 weeks is nothing, right? And this is the perspective that I try to give to veterans. I'm going to be a veteran twice as long as I was a soldier. And I was a soldier for nearly a quarter of a century. If I live to be 70 years old, I'm going to have something entirely different, right?
Mm-hmm.
And for some veterans, you're going to be a veteran 6, 7, 8 times longer than you were in the service. And so being able to keep that perspective and know, there's a very small dot on a very small dot in the overall universe, to be able to say that, it's 2 weeks is nothing, 6 months is nothing. It feels like a long time we're in the middle of it, but keeping that perspective of where it actually is within our lifetime makes it a lot easier for me to slow myself down, I guess.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny, the minute that you started talking about time frames, I just remember that being a primary survival mechanism in the military, right? Because the military has all kinds of stuff that is absolutely unpleasant. And if it teaches you anything, it's that you can live through unpleasantness for quite a while and still look back on that with those moments that are really profound, that end up being cornerstones to the experience that you wouldn't have had if it wasn't miserable, that if it wasn't hard, if it wasn't a struggle, if you didn't get a no.
But even that awareness, it goes to the idea of it felt like a lifetime when we were in the middle of it, right? Yeah. It felt like, eons, and then all of a sudden we wake up and it's 10 years later. This is one thing that I like to bring to the awareness of the veterans that I work with is, do you realize it's been 15 years since that happened? Oh, crap. I didn't know that they don't have that awareness because, time is so fluid, right? And our perceptions of time are fluid. I don't recall where I heard it, but this idea of when you're 7, a year lasts a lot longer than when you're 70.
Yeah.
That's because when you're 7, it's 1/7 of your life. When you're 70, it's 1/70th of your life. And so that's why time seems to speed up as you get older, because you realize there's not that many Christmases left. And so being able to say my perception of time is not reality, right? The minute is a minute, but I perceive it to be differently. And so you can say, man, and even this awareness of not only did I make it through that horrible time, I recall what I was thinking in that horrible time, that this will never end, and now it has, and so this time shall pass too.
Yeah. That's a solid way to go about it, man. So I want to be respectful, right? We've only got a few minutes left. I've really enjoyed this, man. This is really fun, man. I like hearing kind of your, Spider-Man origin story into a counselor. I love that, how much that resonated with me in my moment. And I don't know about you, but it tends to be that way for all the bigger career changes I hear from people. There's this moment where somebody noticed or somebody put an idea into their head that wasn't there before. So I really appreciate that. If there's one lesson that you want the listeners to catch from our conversation today, what would it be?
I think in the term that I have come to consider it is, how do we operationalize serendipity? How do we create awareness in ourselves so that we are in tune and paying attention to these opportunities? And there's actually been research on this, and I'll have to send it to you so you can include it in the notes or the description.
That'd be great.
But to be able to be in the right mindset, to be prepared for strange opportunities, and to be placing yourselves in places where that kind of happens. A story that I like to tell is my father-in-law, a great guy, 81 years old, 82 probably by now. He still works as a road crew supervisor building highways in Tennessee, it's things like that. Works when he wants to because he's 81 and you can do that. And I was talking to him one time about how he got into it. And he said, well, we grew up on a farm and they were building the Alcoa Highway, close to the farm. And I would go sit on the side of the road and watch these guys, do their stuff. And then they handed me a road sign, and then they, taught me how to drive a digger and all these other things. If they had decided, and he even saw this, he said, if they would have decided to build Alcoa Highway 10 miles away, I wouldn't have been there, and I likely wouldn't be doing what I did for a career. I mean, it's that. I mean, it's literally that serendipitous and just random chance sometimes. The problem that I see is a lot of people don't find themselves open to that random chance. They just have their head down. This is what I did when I was in the military. This is what I'm going to do after the military. And they see all of these random chances that just fly by. And so being open to the random chance of the universe, God moving in your life, however you like to see it, it's really led to a lot of really enjoyable things for me. And if we don't keep ourselves open to that, then we're going to miss it.
Yeah, I think that is exactly what most of my clients get to. When they're too worried about what's happened or they're too worried about what's coming, they miss what they can do right now.
Mm-hmm.
That's perfect. All right, man. Well, thanks for coming on. I know you got to get back to helping people. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me on the show. I know that we've been trying to do this for a bit, but everything happens at exact moment when it's supposed to.
There we go, bud. Thanks for being on, man. I look forward to posting it.
Absolutely. Appreciate it.
All right, and that was our conversation with Duane. Check the show notes for some of the resources that he mentioned. He did follow up, as always, and give me that link. I'll include that. Also, if you're looking for anything related to military mental health or just military issues in general, veteranmentalhealth.com is where you can find a series of resources both for national stuff and Colorado. His site is the reason I don't keep the most vigorous resource list for veterans up on mine. I simply refer to his. That's how much I trust it. Additionally, Duane got his book out, which is Combat Veteran Don't Mean Crazy. If you're interested and have been there or have a loved one who's been there, it's a great book. I own it. I read it. I'm really proud of him for putting it out there. As always, thank you so much for listening and sharing these stories with us. If you enjoyed the episode, please throw us a like or a review wherever you're listening. And as always, have a great day.